whoever may be listening, when the voice and the vision on the inside is louder than all opinions on the outside, you're on your path of mastery. Give yourself permission to shine, not shrink. Give yourself permission to do something extraordinary, not ordinary. Because the true you is. The true you is.
Today, we are joined by Dr. John Demartini, internationally acclaimed best-selling author.
He's a world-renowned human behavioral expert with a movie star resume to boot.
There's enough energy sitting in there, in one atom, to do amazing things. In your life, you have an exaggerated self where you're proud and inflated and self-righteous. We also have a deflated self where we self-depreciate and minimize ourselves. And somewhere at the midpoint is our authentic self. And that is about as close as we get to knowing ourselves.
That sounds to me like somebody that is living their integrated self. You know, there's that saying, jack of all trades, master of none, but like you've got a deep depth, quote me on that, of knowledge and expertise in all these disciplines that you bring together into your work. Like, what's your story? How did you become you? We're going to start with a very vague question. How did you become you?
That's a good question. I was born with a speech impediment.
Okay.
And I was found to have learning challenges. I was told in first grade by my first grade teacher, who tried to teach me how to learn to read, in front of my parents, that I'm afraid your son will never be able to read or write, communicate effectively, probably not go very far in life or amount to much. No matter what I did, I couldn't read. I didn't read till I was 18. I made it through school by asking smart kids questions and fumbling around with questions, which I'm known for in my world of questions. And I left school, was a high school dropout. When I turned about 13, I left home.
I was too. I just want you to know we're two high school dropouts talking here. So
exactly.
Good company.
Yeah. So I had a bit of a challenge, and I left home. I was born in Houston, Texas, which I found out.
Ding, ding, ding. My audience knows that I was too, so we have lots to talk about there as well. Anyways, sorry to interrupt.
Anyway, I left home at 13. It was a street kid. And you probably remember Stadium Bowl, which is a bowling alley on Main Street there near the medical center. It wasn't too far from the medical center. I used to hang out there.
I grew up probably, I was born at West University. That's where I lived. And then we were 10. We moved over to the Rice University Med Center District, probably 2 miles from that bowling alley.
If that. And so I lived in the back of that bowling alley at night sometimes. There was a place
as a teenager.
Yeah, as a 13-year-old.
What school did you drop? Let me ask, what school did you drop out of?
My parents moved from Houston, Texas to Richmond, Texas. There was a Lamar school there. I dropped out of school. I went back to my area of Houston where compared to Richmond, Texas, there wasn't much going on there. And I hung out with my friends and buddies that I had as a kid. And
Dr. Demartini is frozen. Oh, Dr. Demartini, are you back?
There you are. Yeah, I'm back.
We lost you there for a minute. You were telling me before the episode that you're actually on a boat. Is that right?
Yes. My home is I reside on a ship. I travel around the world on the ship, so I live on a ship.
Okay, so spotty internet issues, is that a thing you deal with, I suppose?
Not normally. I don't normally have a problem. I'm not sure what's happening. Maybe there's a cloud or something out there. I don't know. But,
let me ask, you said Lamar High School. That's Lamar in Richmond or that's Lamar in Houston?
In Richmond.
Okay, because I actually went to Lamar High School in Houston for a brief minute, probably named after the same person. Crazy.
I think that was a better grade school than I think I was going to at the time.
Well, anyway, that's the one I dropped out of, so don't ask me.
We were probably doing the same thing, but I made it out. I hitchhiked out to California and down into Mexico when I was 14. I moved over to Hawaii when I was 15 because I wanted to surf, and Texas wasn't the surf capital. No. So I went to California and Mexico and then Hawaii, and I lived on the North Shore, first under a bridge, then in a park bench, bathroom, an abandoned car. I just kept social climbing. I nearly died at 17. I ended up going to a health food store to get some nutrition in me. ended up going to a yoga class that somebody told me to go to. And there I met a teacher named Paul C. Bragg. And one night in 1 hour, the one man inspired me by a presentation to make me believe that someday I could be intelligent and that I could learn to read and speak properly. That night, my life changed. And that was the night I had a dream and a vision to travel the world and become intelligent and speak. And that was 50 plus years ago. And here I am. And I went on a journey from that point on. And I wanted to know everything I could get my hands on. And the way I went back to try to go back into education was to start memorizing words in the dictionary. And I started to do 30 words a day until I had a 20,000 word vocabulary and then I was able to go back to school. It was a very slow, tedious, step-by-step process to get back to school. But I've never put books down since. Once I learned I could read, it's a very inspiring thing. So I've read in 300 different disciplines now, over 30,700 and something books now. So I'm a constant reader.
So doing the math, you said that was over 50 years ago when you were 17. So you're what, 70-ish in that ballpark?
I'll be 69 in a few months, yes. So
inauspicious beginnings, dropouts, essentially homeless surfer bum. And here you are at, 69, nearly 69 years old, with all your accomplishments and more than that, like all your kind of vigor and joie de vivre and intellectual, rigor, right? Like you're obviously working like this, you're just thriving person. So right there, I hope everybody takes note, whatever place you're at, whatever your circumstances, the beginning doesn't define the ending or even really what's in between. So incredible story. Why do you think you weren't? Why is it that professional educators dubbed you unable to read or learn when clearly they were so dead wrong?
Well, the truth was I was reading backwards. I had dyslexia and I did have a speech impediment. I used to have to go to the medical center in Houston to a speech pathologist when I was 1.5 years old till 4 because I wasn't using my mouth properly. So I did have challenges, but I was determined after meeting this guy to figure out a way to overcome that. He inspired me to believe that I could. And so it was a tedious objective, let's put it that way. I mean, I literally had to memorize and pronounce words and spell words. I mean, I would write the words properly 20 times, pronounce them many, many times. And my mom used to test me on it when I moved back home. Test me on those words until I could get them exactly accurate, 30 words a day. We worked on it 30 words a day until I pretty well memorized the dictionary. And then I could understand words. So it was a slow, tedious process. Very grateful that we didn't give up on that.
So I actually saw a quote this morning that you just brought to life, which was, and I'm going to butcher it, but it was something to the effect of, if you really want to inspire people and change the world, don't be so eager to show everyone what you can do. Get in the business of showing other people what they can do. And it sounds like you had somebody do that for you, and it changed everything.
Well, my mom, I think my mom didn't finish anything but high school. She didn't go on to college, but she was a crossword puzzle person. And so words were inspiring to her. And that way she could keep up with other intelligent people because she knew a lot of words. And so when I told her I wanted to learn how to, pronounce words properly and spell properly and everything else, it wasn't hard for her to go, absolutely, that's something I can help you with. So I think that was a blessing. And she assisted me on that. It was a tedious process, but if you just do, I always say it's incremental momentum builds big dreams. If you just do a little bitty baby step every single day, you make a big dream. Piggy banks become biggie banks, as they say. And giving yourself permission to pursue something that's deeply meaningful, that's something that there's no turning back on. So when I first started to go back to school, I took a GED and miraculously guessed and passed. It was purely closing my eyes and just putting a dot on a thing and going with it. Somehow this thing got passed. So I tried to go back to a school and I failed. I got a 27 and needed a 72 to pass. So I almost gave up on the idea of being a teacher and traveling the world and that kind of thing.
So I have to make the obvious joke. You were so dyslexic that you got the score, you just got it backwards. A 27 instead
Got
of
it backwards.
72.
Exactly. You need a 72 to pass. You got 27. So my mom, I came home and I was crying on the living room floor because I really thought that I was going to go in this new trajectory, to be a teacher. And I was a surfer. I was a good surfer. I got in surf magazines, surf movies and things at the time. And she saw me crying on the living room floor and she came in from shopping and she said, "What happened, son?" I said, "I blew the test." And I recited what my first grade teacher said to me. "I'm afraid your son will never be able to read or write or communicate, never amount of thing, and never go very far in life." I said to my mom that. I said, "I guess I don't have what it takes." And I wanted to kind of throw in the towel for a moment. And she just paused and looked at me and put her hand on my shoulder. And she said, "Son, whether you become a great teacher and philosopher and travel around the world like you dream, whether you return to Hawaii and ride giant waves like you've done, or the return to the streets and panhandle as a bum like you've also done, I just want to let you know that your father and I are going to love you no matter what you do, son, whatever you decide to do." When I heard that, the gratitude, the love, the presence, the certainty of what she was saying got to me. And my hand went into a fist and I looked up and I saw a vision that came to me the night that I was with Paul Bragg. And I don't know if you want to see that, but I could show you a picture because it was painted by a famous painter later. But this is the painting that was painted by Andrew Tischler of the dream that I saw when I was 17.
Oh, wow. Is that St. Peter's?
No, it's just a balcony sitting over a square with 1 million people with an iconic building from every major city around the world.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah, it's beautiful. If you're listening on the podcast platforms, go to YouTube. It's worth a glimpse.
But I saw that in my mind's eye, and I said to myself with my hand in my fist, I said, "I'm going to master this thing called reading and studying and learning. I'm going to master this thing called teaching. And I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to travel whatever distance. I'm going to pay whatever price to give my service of love across this planet. I'm not going to let any human being on the face of the earth stop me now, not even myself." And I had this no turning back determination moment. And I went and hugged my mom and thanked her for what she said. And I went into my room and I got the Funk and Wagnalls dictionary. In those days, if you bought $20 worth of food from Kroger, you got the volume of an encyclopedia. There's a dictionary from Funk and Wagnalls that came with it. And I got that thing out and I started at the very first word, A, kind of thing. And I made a commitment to go through that book and memorize that book. And I went 30 words a day until that book is devoured. And with the help of my mom, we got me through that. And once I did that, all I want to do is read.
So a couple things come to mind. One is I really resonated with what your mom told you. I had a moment I guess I was just around my 17th birthday, right when I was ready to drop out of high school. And I basically told my parents, I don't see the point. I don't want to go get a 9-to-5 job someday. I want to create meaning in this world. Basically, I want to drop out and become a musician, a jazz musician. I want to improvise. I want to create sound that's never existed before. And so I was very specific about wanting to learn jazz. Now, I could play a little because I took some lessons when I was a kid, but I was no serious musician. I couldn't even play scales with any proficiency or any kind of basic aptitude. So it was but they basically said the same thing. They're like, look, you may end up flipping burgers at McDonald's if you follow through on this and drop out. But if it's really truly what you want to do, and you know yourself well enough that we believe you when you say that you will not be happy if we force you to stay in school, then we'll support you. I mean, we'll love and support you. Like, we won't financially support you, but like we support you. You know, and I grew up, my dad's Jewish. And so there was like, we were a half Jewish, half Christian household. And so there was always this idea of like, in the Judaic tradition, like, hey, you were a man at 13. So if at 17, if you want to make your own choices, like we got your back. And I can only, and as a parent now, I have 4 kids. You have kids?
I have 3 kids.
Okay,
3 children. Well, they're adults, 38, 35, 32.
But and I have 4 kids, and I think that I'm sure I look at it and I go, that was easy. It sounds easy to say, but in practice, it's really hard to do, because as parents, we very often want to protect our kids from themselves. And so I think that it's really inspiring that you had that moment. And I have to imagine that was life transforming, and that for parents out there to weigh the trade-off between protecting your kids, but also disempowering them insofar as you don't allow them to chart their own course. And frankly, we live in a world now where the traditional course is sort of so futile anyways. Like, you're not gonna make millions of dollars and retire at 65 statistically by like getting a job and being a good little foot soldier your whole career. So like, might as well do something interesting anyways. That would be my point of view. But so anyway, I just wanted to call that out, that you had a really, really magical mom, it sounds like. But the other thing, and this is a question, is, so you spent the first 17 years of your life, and maybe the setup for the question is, did you think that you were unintelligent, or did you just think you had a specific cognitive limitation in one area?
Well, I was good on a surfboard.
Okay.
And so I guess that's kinesthetic intelligence, because there's so many.
Yeah, but also you could have been classed as a dumb jock too.
Well, I had to wear a dunce cap in first grade. Me and Daryl.
That was a real thing?
Yeah,
okay.
Real thing.
Okay. I don't think they allow those anymore.
No, I don't think so. But there was a dunce cap in those days. And I befriended the cutest girl in the class, Martha Rose Scartosi, who was a beautiful girl. And I used to walk her home so she could tell me what she got out of the day. And I befriended Jerry Sampson and Clinton Duvall. They were also very smart kids that became doctors. And I used to ask them, what did they learn today? What did they get out of the book? What did they get out of the reading? And if I could hear stuff, I could process stuff. But speaking it and doing visually, it wasn't working. Mm-hmm. So I found alternative ways to get through until I was 12. And then when my parents moved to Richmond, Texas, there were no smart kids. Mm. We were in a really low socioeconomic area and a lot of racial issues. And I just dropped. I said, this isn't going to work. I started failing. So, my parents, my dad tried to teach me how to be an entrepreneur at a young age. When I was 9, I had to pay $7.50 a week to live at home. And that gave me clothing, food, and rent. But I had to work in the neighborhood. And my dad said, I'm going to make you an entrepreneur and figure out how to survive on your own out there, even if you're mowing yards. Because if you're not going to make it in school, you're going to need to be an entrepreneur. You need to figure out how to do it on your own. Even though that word wasn't the word he used. He didn't use that word, but that's what he was doing. So I said, I'm going to teach you how to stand on your own 2 feet and be a survivor out there. So when I left, they weren't shocked. Yeah. Because school wasn't working. And I knew what I was good at was surfing. I had this natural aptitude to stand on a surfboard for some reason. So my dad and mom dropped me off on the freeway with a notarized piece of paper saying my son's not a runaway. I had $13 in my pocket. You had to have $13 not to be vagrant. And said, go friggin' live your dream.
Wow. What a cool story. So you sort of glided right into what I was trying to get at, which is a fundamental question of like, did the adaptation or compensation for your cognitive limitations early in life, obviously you compensated with let's say a different part of the brain that you probably, it's kind of like a blind person has an enhanced sense of smell, right? You overcompensate or compensate. So do you feel like that boosted your aptitude or your abilities in other areas that then once you came back around and shored up the reading and speaking, it essentially it was now on a higher foundation, and you actually, your disadvantage was converted into an advantage because of the compensation earlier in life. Do you feel that's true?
Probably. I was pretty good on a surfboard. I was never in the very top leagues, but I was in the B leagues in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
It was like there's about a dozen people in the very top league, and I was in that second tier. But I just had a desire to be intelligent after meeting that guy. He was such an inspiration. And I never thought I was going to be. I never thought I was going to be smart, read. I had to have one of my surf buddies used to read to me. I used to ask him, can you read that to me? He's still a friend of mine. He's, after all these years, 50 something years. So, I think when the teacher said, you'll never do these things, and then I later discovered that I could, I found that it was probably the most fulfilling aspect of my life was when I first started going back to school and going back and passing. I lived in the library, and all I wanted to do is read that library. I wanted to be able to catch up with the rest of the kids and be able to increase my vocabulary. And I wanted to understand universal laws because the guy that spoke that night inspired me the idea of what is a universal law. Well, that led me into encyclopedias and what is a universal law. And that led me to an idea called the logos, which is a term that means the reason and order in the universe kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And
then what I did is I took every known discipline that I could find in the dictionary and encyclopedias, every discipline, geology, meteorology, astronomy, every discipline, every ology that you could study. I made a list of them all. And then I made a commitment to read 100 books in each area. So I would have a body of knowledge I could build a foundation on. And that's what made me want to be the polymath. And I read a book, the history of European philosophers from Descartes to Nietzsche, or Nietzsche to Descartes, I mean. And I know Descartes said he wanted to be a man of letters, an individual that had many different backgrounds so he could study something that would be more a bigger foundation. I just wanted to understand the laws of the universe, and I figured that if I could find something in all the disciplines that was common, I could use that as a foundation. So that's what made me want to be polymathic. I just wanted to read and study. So I literally started reading 18 to 20 hours a day. Because it was, I didn't care about the rest. Party time I already done my party time. I lived as a street kid and I lived as a surfer and I partied. I've done that. Been there, done that, almost died from that. Mm-hmm. So that wasn't interesting to me. So now it's time to let's go focus. So I became neurotically driven to want to learn. And I'm still, when I'm 69, I spend 7 days a week teaching, researching, writing, and traveling the world. I only do 4 things. Everything else is delegated away, so I don't have to be distracted by anything other than teach every day, write every day, read every day, write every day, and travel the world. So everything else is delegated. I haven't driven a car in 33 years. I haven't cooked since I was 24. I don't do anything else except teach, research, write, travel.
Wow. So, okay, before we close the surfer chapter and move into, kind of how it evolved, what you do now and what you've done over the last few decades, I got to ask, you mentioned that you were in surfer movies. You also mentioned that you lived on the North Shore. I was like weirdly I'm not a surfer and I'm not terribly athletic in any type of discipline, but I was weirdly into a movie called North Shore when I was a kid. And so I just have to ask, were you in that movie? Like, is that one of the movies you're referring to?
No, I wasn't.
Do you know the movie I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I was there in 1969, 70. I got there when I was 15. And the movie I first got in was 5 Summer Stories. And I'm not going to say exactly I was some super hot surfer in there, but I was happened to be in the movie.
Okay.
But some of the people in these movies that were real, I surfed with, so I knew them. I mean, Laird Hamilton was left on a beach by a mother at the same beach park I was at. So I lived up on the bluff of the beach under a park bench, and then in an abandoned car, and he was down literally on the beach, sleeping on the beach as a kid. And I was around at that time, around just turning 16, and he was about 6, 7. And Bill Hamilton, who lived down in front of Pipeline, saw him on the beach and went down on the beach one morning and said, who are you and what are you doing on the beach? And then, do you have parents? And took him in and found the mother and they married her. And he's one of the greatest surfers, greatest watermen on the planet.
Wow. What a crazy.
I surfed with those guys, and I knew, Jerry Lopez and Ben Ipa and all these characters that we surfed in those days. And,
okay. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just have to ask. I had a Brazil. We're winding all over the place here. I had a Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructor in my 20s who had grown up as a surfer kid on the shores of Hawaii, and he said that's how he learned to fight. That's actually what got him into jiu-jitsu, because he said there were these local gangs, and it was very territorial, and who could surf on what beach, and you basically had to learn to fight. So I'm curious, did you encounter any of that kind of hostility?
I did. I absolutely did. In fact, I got beaten up a number of times. I got my surfboards destroyed. I've had my tent ripped apart. You had to go through it. That was the initiation. Right. They had to know that if you could ride a board and you were good at it, you stay. You get to stay. Otherwise, you're going to be going home. Go home, Allie.
Yeah. Wow.
So we had to go through that. And then I finally became friends with two guys that were locals, and they respected my ability to surf. And then once you're in that group, then the rest of them leave alone. Now you're in. So I had to go through that, and I saw a lot of local people because they didn't like the crowds. They didn't want all these American, mainlanders coming over there and taking up their spots.
And that was how the story was told to me, was basically that if you were a white kid trying to be on the beach, you had to prove yourself to essentially the Hawaiian locals. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've had fist fights, the whole bit.
Okay. I love. Yeah, I mean, I love it. You really are a great embodiment of the real value. I mean, literally, it sounds like, of the school of hard knocks. And I think, I have a number of crusades that I'm on in this life, and one of them is the comfort crusade. Parents trying to make their kids comfortable all the time, and I think to their detriment in a lot of ways. But okay, let's fast forward. You reference universal laws. This podcast, for me, began as essentially, you could call it a research project into universal laws of success. Like, I wanted to talk to as many really successful people as I could and try to find the commonalities so that we could, somebody that was on this journey with me, listening to episode after episode, would just sort of naturally, by osmosis, start to understand, like you're talking about, universal principles that undergird success, high achievement, and ultimately, it's not about competitive high achievement. It's about having the skills and creating a life path that allows you to manifest whatever your unique created greatness is, right? And so I'm not surprised at all that you honed in on universal laws, because that's one of the themes I've now found through all of these interviews that I've done, is that really successful people tend to, at some critical point in their life, often earlier rather than later, although it can happen, whenever, they have some sort of, call it road to Damascus epiphany, where the universal laws or the first principles or the foundations of what will become their life become clear to them, and they hold on and they never let go. And to the extent that they're successful, it's because again and again, they return to their personally defined fundamental principles. So I'm not at all surprised to hear you say that, but that seems like a good entry point into the work that you do now, the Demartini Method, a lot of your YouTube videos. there does seem to be this underlying, philosophy slash spirituality slash metaphysics to everything I've encountered of Dr. Demartini. And I wonder if you could unpack it and also to some degree source it for us.
Well, when I was 23, I was entering into professional school, and I asked the question, why are some people doing what they say and some people not? Why are some walking their talk, some are limping their life? What is it that makes people fulfill what they say, not? And it led me to the study of human axiology, a study of human values. And I devoured everything I could get my hands on at that, which wasn't really a lot, which is surprising. And I found out that every human being, regardless of gender or convention or culture or age or gender spectrum, live moment by a set of priorities or set of values, things that are most to least important in their life that's unique to them, like a fingerprint. And that set of values, as you go up the list, becomes more intrinsic. And they spontaneously act on those without needing extrinsic motivation. But as you go down the list, it requires more extrinsic motivation. Just like a young teenage boy who loves video games, you don't need to remind him to do his video games, but you need to remind him to do his chores and his homework. So whatever is most intrinsic to the individual that they want to fulfill, this is where they're going to excel. And whatever needs extrinsic motivation, they have to be reminded and motivated to do. McGregor in the 60s called it theory Y and theory X when people go to work. Those are self-initiated or outside motivated. So identifying what is truly demonstrated by their daily life actions as what is most important to them, in my opinion, is a good starting point for uncovering where they're going to excel. Because their ontological identity revolves around what they value most. Their epistemological pursuit of knowledge and their academic excellence revolve around what they value most. Their teleological purpose, the thing that they feel is most meaningful, revolves around what they value most. So epistemology, teleology, ontology all revolve around what that highest value is. So I started to look at what are the ways we can determine what that is to find out where you can rely on people to do it, because people are disciplined, reliable, and focused on what they value most, and they procrastinate, hesitate, and frustrate in what they value less. So if you want to get most efficient, effective at achieving things, it's making sure that the pursuit that you're going after with your intention or attention revolves around what you value most, or is at least linked in your mind to that, or otherwise you will be needing reminding and motivation and incentives constantly to do it, which is less than efficient. So I went out to try to find a methodology to discern what is truly valuable to people, not what they say. Because if you ask people what they value, I've done value determinations for 45 years on millions of people. And I feel pretty confident in knowing that most people lie to themselves. For instance, let me give you an analogy. I was in a conference with Richard Branson in South Africa on a success summit. There are about 5,000, 6,000 people there. And I asked the room, how many of you would love to be financially independent? And everybody put their hand up. Some people put their double hand up. Some people put their leg in the air. So everybody claimed, 99.99999% of that room put their hands up and said, I claim I want to be financially independent. And then I asked them, how many of you are having passive income exceeding active income and don't have to work, you only work because you love to? And all the hands went down except 7 in the VIP section. And I said, isn't it interesting that you all claim you want to be financially independent, but then your life doesn't demonstrate it? Now, would you like to learn something about that and why that's so? So I had them get a piece of paper out, and I said, on this piece of paper, I'm going to give you 10 million US dollars, which goes quite a far away in South Africa at the time. Right. I'm going to give you 10 million US dollars, and you have 60 seconds to write the 10 things you're going to do with that $10 million. When I say go, quickly write as fast as you can and make sure you get all 10 things down What are you going to do with that money? On your mark, get set, go. And they're writing as fast as they can the 10 things they would do if they had $10 million suddenly given to them. And I said, stop. Hand it to the person on your left. Now, the person that's just received this, I want you to go in there and identify how much of that money is now still left in assets that produce income versus has been spent on consumables that depreciate in value. And between 20 and 80% of the money was gone on consumable depreciables within 60 seconds, which meant that they bought that car, they bought that house, they bought that trip, they bought the things, they bought this boat, they got this car, these clothes. A very few, I mean, a handful of people bought assets and put $10 million into assets that was going to produce passive income. And I explained to them that unless you have a higher value on deferred gratification and buying assets that actually put money in your pocket, you're not going to be financially independent. You're going to keep spending it on immediate gratification, raise your lifestyle, and put yourself farther into a hole instead of actually get ahead. I said, so what you say is important to you is not really important to you. So the first thing we need to know is to know what's truly important to you and not live in a delusion and fantasy about who you say you want to be. And so that's where values come in. The hierarchy of your values dictates your financial destiny. The hierarchy of your values dictates how you spend your money. And if you don't have a value on assets, you have a value on immediate gratification and consumables that depreciate, you're going to work your way backwards instead of forward into the financial world. You're going to be a slave of money instead of a master of money. So I had to wake up on how important values were. And then I explained to them, we're going to determine what your values are. We're going to look at where wealth building is on it. And then we're going to give you an option to set up goals that are congruent with it to have fulfillment, or to change the hierarchy of your values, both of which I can show you to do. But unless there's a congruency, there's not going to be fulfillment, because you're going to beat yourself up going, why am I not wealthy? If you keep having a fantasy but don't have the action steps to back it. So this incongruency is what made me fascinated by the cornerstone of human behavior, which is the value structure that people were living their lives by. So I worked and created as objective of mechanism to determine what they really live. What does their life really demonstrate? Not their fantasies, not what they say it is, not what the social idealisms are, not what people expect of them, not what they think they should, ought to, supposed to, got to, have to, must, or need to, but what exactly is it they actually are living and demonstrating. And finding out what that is what was the core competence of what that is. So I developed a system for that to help people live congruently, because that's where they end up starting to excel. That's where they build incremental momentum. Mm-hmm. That's where they end up expanding their space and time horizons and have patience to defer gratification, to do something more magnificent with their life. So that's where the starting point became. And that is a basic universal principle for human behavior.
So there's two books, one of which I read recently, the other of which I'm actually reading right now, that come to mind with everything that you just shared. One is to just completely agree with you that everybody lies to themselves and to the world. And there's a book actually called Everybody Lies, which I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's relatively new, and it's really fascinating. And it essentially uses big search data, right? Mostly Google search data, to actually find out what people really, by the questions they ask Google in the privacy of their own homes, you get a much more accurate insight into how they really think and feel than by anything they'll tell you on a survey, right? And it's a great book. The other, though, is The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman. I don't know if that's a book that you've read, but it talks a lot about the sort of modern psychologized, like I think he calls it therapeutic man, which there is an Edward Reef concept. But anyway, a really good book that basically gets into how in the modern world, we sort of have taken this expressive individualism concept and to some degree overdone it, in the sense that we're trying to define our own reality all the time. And you used three words, which I'll define for the audience if they're not as nerdy as we are: ontology, epistemology, and teleology. Ontology, the study of existence; epistemology, the study of knowledge; and teleology, you might say, the study of purpose, right? Or created design. And so all of those disciplines or sub-disciplines of philosophy, you might say, point to a notion that there is a truth underneath that which we try to abstractly create ourselves through our life experience. And so to kind of, stitch together everything that you just said in terms of your method, and I'm postulating this, and I want you to comment on it and tell me if I'm on or off course here, that the questions you ask, and I read about the Demartini Method on your website, right? So I know so much of it is grounded in the questions you ask, but it's more how you answer the questions that to a large degree determines the value of your answers. And what I mean by that is, and this goes to epistemology, like, is knowledge something that to some degree you create or you build for yourself or you fill in for yourself, or is it simply something that you discover through exploration where there's like this, call it this universal or infinite knowledge source, and your job is just to peel away the layers and discover it? And I would argue the latter. And it seems like in the world we live in, this is where I'm referencing The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, so many people are trying to decide what they think is true instead of surrendering to what was already true before they even asked the question. And your method seems to probe in that direction, and I'm curious if I'm reading it right at all.
Well, I think if we study the pursuit of truth, at one time it was a subordination to an outer authority, a religious authority at one time, that was the source of truth.
Right.
Be modernism, you might say. And then in modernism, the science, the objective truth of the science and the dialectic, trying to find the synthesis of opposite propositions, was a path. And then they realized that no matter how hard you get towards objectivity, subjectivity still creeps its way in. And so today we have quantum theory with probabilistic perspectives on top of classical, and we're trying to weave these ideas together into some sort of unified idea, what is true in the universe. I use as a criteria, in your life, you have an exaggerated self where you're proud and inflated and self-righteous and puffed up and arrogant and narcissistic and these kind of things. And not you, but I mean people. And right. Then also, we also have a deflated self where we self-depreciate and minimize ourselves. And then we oscillate between those two. We can vacillate between them. And somewhere at the midpoint is our authentic self. We have an elevated and depressed self-esteem, but right in the middle is the true self-worth. And in that moment, physiologically, we have a gamma burst, a gamma wave in the brain, a synchronicity in the brain where there's an integration of the brain and the medial prefrontal cortex and the frontal cortex that confirms a moment of authenticity. And that is about as close as we get to knowing ourselves. When we're not puffing ourselves up or beating ourselves up, we're just centered. And we get tears of gratitude in a moment of grace, if you will. And I don't mean grace like supernatural grace, but just a state of poised, graceful physiology. You're not having antagonist and agonist muscular systems fighting with each other in that moment. You're just present. And that's about as close as we get to knowing, I think, that we can have. I always say if you're infatuated with somebody or proud of yourself, you're blind to the downsides and conscious of the upsides, and you don't really know yourself. If you're resenting yourself or resenting somebody else and ashamed of yourself, you're conscious of the downsides, unconscious of the upsides. But when you're actually seeing both sides and conscious of both your hero and your villain at the same time, and you actually can love and integrate and appreciate those at the same time, you have about as close as you can get to your authentic self. And that's when you know yourself. And that's epistemology at its best. That's the synthesis between the dialectic of propositions about your own being.
Yeah.
And so I'm a firm believer in accessing that. And my method is an accountability, a mathematically accountable system of questions to assist people in holding themselves accountable to see both sides of people and themselves or events. So they're not infatuated or resentful and have a subjectively biased, skewed view of their reality, and have a moment where they brought to tears of gratitude for now being present with what is instead of what they think it's supposed to be. See, when we're in survival mode, we need adrenaline to be able to capture the prey or to avoid the predator. And so anytime we see something that supports our values or challenges our values, we tend to label it prey or predator in our amygdala. And so what we do is we subjectively interpret things in a way so we can seek it or avoid it with an impulse or an instinct. As long as we have the subjective bias interpretation, the confirmation bias, disconfirmation bias, the false positive, the false negative interpretation, in order to survive, to capture the prey and predator in mind, we're going to have a skewed view of who we are. And many of us take that all the way to absolutisms, and we get into an illusion of absolutist ideas that, I'm always positive, I'm never negative, or I'm always negative, I'm never positive, or they're always mean and they're never nice. And whenever you hear always and nevers, you've taken the subjective bias to the extreme of infinity over one or one over infinity perceptions. That's not the real self. That's not the real interpretation of other people. Nobody's one-sided. I'm not a nice person. I'm not a mean person. I'm a human being with a set of values that if you support my values, I'm nice as a pussycat. If you challenge my values, I'm even mean as a tiger. And I'm a human being with both of those. And I oscillate between those, and I'm sort of a synthesis of those. So I'm identifying that and helping people identify that I'm intrigued by, because it gives them a higher probability of doing something meaningful in their life, which is the mean between the pairs of opposites, as Aristotle said. And when we are living by our highest priority, highest value, we have the most medial prefrontal cortex blood supply to be able to help us become more objective and less governed by the amygdala and subjectively distorted. So that's about as close as we can get. In Scientific American last October, I believe, there's a great article on the medial prefrontal cortex as the seat of the integrated self in our brain, taking in all the neuroassociative complexes that come in for sensory input and filtering through the thalamus so they get integrated. And that's the place where it kind of integrates. That's where the corpus callosum unites at that location, and it integrates the most brain and the most synchronicity. So that's about as close as we get into our brain to be able to identify our authentic self. And it's an approximate, to say the least, but it's still the closest we've got. And so I wanted to create a science to increase the probability of maximizing their awareness of potential and to maximize their appreciation and love for themselves in that space, and to be able to do something that's sustainable, that's fair exchange with other people, which allows them to have the greatest fulfillment in life. Mm-hmm. When I've measured people by the millions about fulfillment, I found that when they're doing something that's deeply inspiring and meaningful to them, that's spontaneously high in their value, and they do it in a way that fulfills other people's values, and they're having it in a fair exchange or remuneration, they get the greatest fulfillment, because the sensory input from people of thank you, and here's the reward, remuneration, and the fulfillment of their motor activities and skills at their peak. This is about as great as it gets in the brain. Your sensory motor cortex is basically maximized in potential. So I'm interested in that. And that's what my method's designed for.
So first of all, thank you for giving a vividly descriptive explanation of why I am an evangelist for entrepreneurialism, because it really is how you bring together, it's kind of like the Japanese concept of ikigai, right? It's like, what do you love? What are you good at? What does the world actually need? And I forget the fourth pole of ikigai, but anyways, this, like you said, the fully integrated self who is still able to survive in a world that runs on currency. You have to find a way to be your integrated self, and then to actually transact that in the form of a value exchange to get paid to be okay. And so this is, I want to kind of bring us in for a landing right here around this idea of the integrated self. You obviously have, and you described your life, right? You read, you write, you teach, and you travel around the world. That sounds to me like somebody that is living their integrated self, right? That as much as almost one could imagine, you get to be yourself for a living, so to speak. Most people are almost the extreme of that, where whatever they do for a living is, to some degree, it's what they have to do, or it's what they sacrifice, and that's why they have to run on, adrenaline and epinephrine and cortisol most of the time. And then I guess they're saving up for the day when presumably they can retire and find their bliss and so forth. Although mathematically that doesn't really happen, in the world very much, just in terms of the raw math of economics, macroeconomics. And this is an old idea, it's Aristotelian, this eudaimonia is like the Greek word, like it's Aristotle's term for happiness that is based on fulfilling. well-being. It's based on fulfilling your optimal design for your life, so to speak. And so I wonder if you could speak to it, because it sounds like we're to some degree in the same business, which is trying to practically operationalize methods that can get people to that state of being. Because frankly, like, what other work is there that really matters, honestly? I mean, if we get everybody there, we'd have world peace because nobody'd be pissed off, right? I mean, literally, it's a tectonic shift in the world to try to get more people to this place. But the obstacles that I always find people bumping up against, and thus indirectly I'm bumping up against, vicariously in their life, is what are they not willing to let go of? What are they holding on to that is obstructing their eudaimonia, or obstructing their well-being, or obstructing their fully integrated self? And so I'm wondering if you've come up with any. I love your methodology through questions, through helping people ask different questions. But can you sort of vamp on anything you've discovered that can help people be more willing to let go of their crutches, so that, so to speak, they can actually fly?
Yeah. Imagine yourself, the word objectivity in philosophy also meant neutrality and whole, which is Aristotle's eudaimonia.
Right.
And subjectivity meant partial awareness and bias, opinion. And so the second we go from a neutral state to a highly valent polarized state, like in chemistry, high valency, if we're highly polarized towards the positive side, we're going to fear its loss. So if we're highly infatuated, we fear its loss. If we're highly resentful, we fear its gain. So there's two basic fears that run all people: the fear of loss of that which they seek, and the fear of gain of that which they're trying to avoid. And the amygdala is of trying to avoid predator and seek prey. It's always trying to look for a hedonistic pursuit, an immediate gratifying hedonistic pursuit. I want a pleasure or their pain. Most people's decisions are a combination of their executive and their amygdala, mostly amygdala, and they're polarized. And so they have a skewed subjective bias, and they think there's more advantage than disadvantage. So they go off and find out it wasn't what they thought. Most goals. And they don't know the difference between a fantasy and a real objective, which the Stoics tried to differentiate. And Aristotle did. The mean was the mean between excess and deficiency of positive and negative perception valencies. Now, the more valent you are and charged you are, which the amygdala does and assigns those valencies into the hippocampus to store it in our memory to make us not be, prepared for things that might frighten us or make sure we capture that prey. The more polarized we are, the more we're going to live rigidly in fear of loss and fear of gain. And so most people have difficulty letting go of those, because anything you infatuate occupies space and time in your mind stored in the hippocampus and the subconscious mind stored there. And anything you resent occupies space and time in your mind and runs you. So anything that you have a polarized view is the static that the Buddhist describes as stop the signal from getting through. And it's the noise that's blocking the signal of the soul, you might say, the real authentic self, the state of unconditional love, the real self. So the moment we ask questions that make us conscious of what we were unconscious of when we were infatuated, bring the fantasy down, and what are the downsides, and bring it back into neutrality. And the moment that we take the thing that we think is terrible and we find out the benefits to it, and we ask ourselves quality questions that equilibrate the mind and bring us back to objectivity, or at least approximate it, the less the fears are there, and the more adaptability and resilient we are. And because when we seek that which supports our values, we get the parasympathetic side. When we try to run from that which challenges our values, we get the sympathetic side. When we bring the autonomics into perfect balance, we have a heart rate variability that maximizes resilience and adaptability. And those individuals in micro adaptabilities are the people that are able to adapt, look ahead, pursue challenges that inspire them instead of keep avoiding challenges that don't. And they're the ones that actually give innovation, creativity, and genius to the planet. And so knowing how to ask questions that equilibrate the mind and liberate us from the bondage of the emotions that are extreme and allow us to have neutrality and resilience allows us to completely lead the path. And that's managing paradoxes. That's being able to transcend the distractions from the impulses and instincts of our animal nature.
So it almost sounds like what you're saying, that the mechanism to kind of cut through the noise and the chaos and the distraction and the fear and, being run by our emotional programming truly is asking questions in search of objective truth. And that, to the extent that I'm capturing what you just said, I love it, because again, then it's that epistemological discovering of truth, discovering of knowledge, rather than, constructing it from the Legos of our own life, so to speak. I love that. I think one of the impediments to that, again, I'm coming off of having recently read The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, so I'm in a very a mode of great cultural critique these days. But I think to a large degree, the glorification of this idea of speaking my truth and I'm, forming opinion, the glorification of opinions of I've always said that everybody deserves a voice, but not everybody deserves a megaphone. But you got to earn the right to broadcast your truth to some degree, and I would argue by demonstration of value. But the social media culture we live in is basically trying to give everybody a megaphone and said, hey, I cogito ergo sum, right? I think, therefore I am. And in your case, I think, therefore I should be listened to, right? And, Plato said opinion is the wilderness between knowledge and ignorance. I think to a large degree, I'm curious if you would agree with this statement, getting your own opinions out of the way of your quest for truth, so that you can find that which is objectively true, regardless of your willingness to agree with it or not, is the starting point that will lead you to your integrated self and actually fulfillment, the fulfillment that to some degree you're trying to artificially get to in a rush by leaning into all of your opinions and all of this divisiveness that you think gives you an identity in the context of conflict. And then you reference Buddhism, which is kind of this notion of just letting all that crap go and just asking better questions until you get to questions that are so objective and empirical that how you feel doesn't even matter anymore. Would you agree with that?
You said it magnificently. If you don't have a check on your subjective opinions, you can run wild like an animal in a forest and got caught in the brambly bushes and the vines instead of having a clear pathway. So if there's no check and balance on your own self, you're vulnerable to that. I think that's what the executive center in the brain was designed for. It was designed to neutralize those subjective opinions and biases to the best of its ability, so you could see things that are actually there, because that's maximizing Spencer's fitness. That's what fitness is about. But we get trapped being right. Our amygdala wants to be proud and wants to hold on to our fantasy that the world's supposed to live in our values. And we want to be proud of our values and think it's right. And that traps people in their opinions. That was what Zeno and Hegel, that's what they were trying to do, trying to find a synthesis between propositions. In my pursuit, and one of the reasons I went to study so many different disciplines, is that I did find the same laws applying all over the place. And so here you have now thousands of researchers, all different opinions. You could see the dialectic in the discipline, but at the same time, you could see them. There was a synthesis between these pairs of opposite arguments. And it seems like people like to take a side. Our mass media is noted for taking a side, and nobody's saying anything except rhetorical persuasions, trying to get the other person to be wrong and they're right, like in a court of law, instead of actually the dialectic where you're trying to both learn from each other and find some wisdom between the two pairs. And the studying the various disciplines increased the probability, didn't guarantee it, but it increased the probability of me being able to see laws that are common in all the disciplines. I found the law of complementation of opposites pretty common. Mm-hmm. It was Heraclitus that described that in his times. Parmenides and him, they had nice discussions about it, on the history of this pairs of opposites and unity of pairs of opposites. And we call that now conservation law and symmetry law and beauty and elegant law in mathematics. But finding those common threads in all the disciplines I've been interested in that because that's the body of knowledge I want to build on. If I couldn't find it universally through all the disciplines, somehow it's still not a universal principle. The difference between a universal law is nobody violates those. The human laws people violate.
Mm-hmm.
So if you build a life on artificial, transient, tribal, oppressor over the oppressed derived laws, you're not going to ever get in touch with the universal laws that actually are the cause of magnificence in your existence. So I'm interested in finding those and pursuing those and building a body of knowledge around that so I can share that. So it will stand the test of not be a fad, not be a trend, but it'll be something that'll be a classic through time.
Well, unfortunately, our time must draw to a close. I know that you have another engagement, and that seems like a good note to end on, because it's also a beginning of a further journey into your work. I mean, essentially, I think we've set up for anybody listening who's like, I want more of what he just said. Awesome. Go to Dr. Demartini's YouTube channel. Go to Dr. Demartini's website. And actually, I shouldn't be speaking for you. Could you please tell the audience where you'd like them to go to get more of this?
You just said it.
Okay.
drdemartini.com. I think that says it all. If they go there, they can go on the show, the Demartini Show. You go to the media. On the media section in our website, you could spend the rest of your life. You're going to have to believe in reincarnation because you're not going to be able to get it all done in your life. Too much of it.
Right. Yeah, I know. As somebody, as a fan, I know I'll never consume all that you produce. But it's amazing. Any subset is a win. Well, listen. Oh, go ahead.
Well, all I can say is that I'm inspired by this conversation. I didn't know all of what your background is, but I feel like I was blessed to be with a gentleman who's on the journey that have a lot of overlaps and a lot of quests that are the same. So thank you for the questions. And thank you for having the depth of knowledge to be able to ask those questions. I can't say I get on podcasts every day that can do that. So I really appreciate that. That's meaningful to me. So thank you for that.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I actually hope it's not presumptuous for me to say I would love to have you back. I feel like we were just starting to get into some really fertile territory.
That's exactly what I feel. I'd be glad to do it because I just feel like we're just starting to warm up. So thank you for that.
Okay. Awesome. I'm going to pass that to my team. Dr. Demartini, as I promised, it would be incredible conversation. Thank you. I too am so grateful we got to spend this time together. Any last words before we sign off?
Whoever may be listening, as I said many years ago, when the voice and the vision on the inside is louder than all opinions on the outside, you're on your path of mastery. Give yourself permission to shine, not shrink. Give yourself permission to do something extraordinary, not ordinary. Because the true you is. The true you is.
Beautiful.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
Feeling frustrated, feeling depressed, feeling disappointed is the best thing that will ever happen to you. It is a sign in your body, first and foremost, that you know something isn't right, that you're on the wrong path.